In this episode, we are talking to Christina. Welcome to the show, Christina. Just so that the audience know who you are, can you briefly tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. My name is Christina Statopoulos. I'm originally from the US, from North Carolina, but I have been based in Madrid, Spain since 2012. And I currently work at Google as an analytical consultant, mainly helping some of our largest advertisers implement advanced data projects. And then on the side, I teach quite a lot. I hold an adjunct faculty position at IE Business School here in Madrid, as well as I'm a guest lecturer at ISDI, another university here. And I teach analytics topics at the MBA level. So pretty much I'm a data nerd. I love working with numbers. And besides my professional life, personally, I'm a huge reader. I read a book a week, and I host a challenge called the Book a Week Challenge on LinkedIn. And I'm also an avid traveler, a lot more so before the global pandemic, obviously. But I'm hoping things get better and I can return to traveling again.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I was reading one of your blogs, and then you said like when you came to Spain, you came from you had a statistics background, then you did some teaching, then you eventually go into Google. I thought that was an inspirational story. Can you just share it with the audience?
Yeah, I've honestly followed a really strange path, to be honest. And I kind of took opportunities as they came. I went with the flow from the start without planning too far in the future. And it ended up getting me to where I am today. So like you said, I studied statistics, actually studied an interdisciplinary field with a focus in statistics. And I did my bachelor's at NC State. And as soon as I graduated in 2012, I knew that I wanted to do something out of the ordinary. I didn't want to go straight to the corporate world like most people do, or straight to an MBA, for example. So less than a month after graduation, I moved to Madrid, Spain. And my original intention was to stay here just 1 year. And I wanted to learn the language and travel the world. And that 1 year has now turned into 8 years. and in all of this time, I was able to learn Spanish. I've traveled to more than 50 countries. And as well, I met my soon-to-be husband. So it's been a success here. But when I first arrived back in 2012, that year was a bad year, particularly for the country because they were still in a deep economic crisis. So finding a job was tough. I was young. I didn't have a lot of relevant work experience, and I didn't even speak the local language at the time. So I had to find a way to sustain myself, and I ended up doing what I would call business English consulting. And I worked with business executives throughout the city, improving their business English, their public speaking skills, presentations, etc. And it was like I found a niche in the market and I made it work. But after about 3 years, I knew that I didn't want to do this long term and I wanted to get back into my actual field. So after 3 years, I started my master's here in business analytics and big data at IE Business School. And that helped me pivot my career back on track. By then as well, I spoke Spanish, so that made it a lot easier, obviously, in the job market. And after that master's, I was able to get a job first as a data engineer, briefly at SAS Institute, and later at Nielsen. And then finally, I transitioned to Google.
That's really inspirational story because you came to Spain and all of a sudden you didn't think like, okay, I'm just going to apply for my dream job. You just took your time. You just learned the language, worked for a bit. Then you went on to do more studying. Then eventually you climbed the ladder. That's one of the tips that any aspiring data scientist should learn, that things will take time, isn't it? Like you can't expect like quick results.
Yeah, for sure. You need to work hard and be patient.
Yeah. Next question, obviously, everyone will be want to know would be like Google is considered like one of the 5 best companies to work for. Everyone had this acronym called FANG: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So people will be interested to know, what is it like working at Google?
Yeah, of course, it has its benefits that everybody very well knows. The typical fun tech work environment with free food, with a game room, with Nerf guns, and that's true, it's like that. As well, we have a lot of employee benefits. We have healthcare, gym stipends, very generous maternity and paternity leave, things like that. But what impresses me most every day is being surrounded by so many clever workmates. There's a lot of very intelligent people around me. They're usually very ambitious, very self-motivated, which also helps you grow personally because you can learn a lot from the people around you. But all of these benefits, they come with their own expectations from the company, which I think people maybe tend to overlook that part because it's not all fun and games. Of course, we're there to work. So the work itself is usually very hard and it's challenging. And although we're not necessarily measured by how many hours we work, we're measured by the output. So it's your responsibility to stay on top of your projects, your priorities. And for example, if you decide to spend all day in the game room, you still need to work to meet your work deadlines. But overall, we have great benefits. You just have to work hard and be ready to be challenged every day.
Yeah, that's you put everything into perspective. Like you said, a lot of people don't see the other side, like what the company is expected of you. Yeah, people sometimes only see like, okay, they have this cool work culture, they're very employee friendly, but at the same time, the company is giving you all that benefits. What can you give back to the company as well? So it's like a two-way street, isn't
For sure, for
it?
sure.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that insight. So another thing people will be interested to know is that there are a lot of articles and things that people read online saying like to get into Google, you need to have papers published, you need to have a PhD. How true is that to get a job into Google?
Yeah, at least from my experience, of course, you do not need a PhD. That's not expected. Google's a huge company. You need to take that into account. All of these tech companies are usually very big companies. And of course, there are teams that do require a PhD, they require research experience, but most of the other teams do not. And the education and the experience level that is expected of you completely depends on the market, on the role, on the team that you're applying to. So it varies widely. I would never make the assumption that you need a minimum of a PhD or a master's. It just depends. But of course, higher education and more experience is always going to work in your favor. You'll be more ready. You'll be more prepared for a lot more of the positions, but it's not required. And in my opinion, it helps to find ways to make yourself stand out as a candidate, not just your studies, but I would also suggest finding something that makes you special when you go to apply for a job, either at Google or any tech company. Find something that makes you stand out from the rest of the candidates besides your education, because a lot of people have very strong education background, even work experience. So it helps to do something else like volunteer work experience maybe every summer, or a side project that's a startup, or maybe just an interesting hobby. But find something that makes you stand out from candidates. And these points, I think, will help you be more remembered by the interviewer.
Yeah, you sort of answered my next question, which was the same. Like, well, how can a candidate applying for not just for Google to any company, in your opinion, how can they stand out? So you answered the question as well. Like, very good points on talking about that application process, and then clarifying that you don't necessarily need a PhD or papers published. It all depends on the role, and then if you can demonstrate that you are passionate and then you can do the job, then definitely you will get the calls from not just from Google, from any company, isn't it?
I'm happy to share a couple more tips if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah.
Because having a point to something that helps you stand out, that's very, very key, I think, to make sure that the interviewer remembers you. But as far as like applying for a job, I don't work in recruiting or HR, so this is just my opinion. But one of the first things that I've noticed is that a lot of people don't put the necessary effort into their resume and their cover letter. People do not realize how important this is, because imagine when you meet a person in person for the first time, you make that first impression. And for me, a resume, a CV, a cover letter, that is your first impression to the company. So when anybody ever asks me about, oh, how can I get a job at Google? How can I get into tech? Make sure first that you invest time in making your resume perfect. And that means also tweaking it to match every role and every company. So your single CV should not be the same for every single application. You need to tweak it a little bit to maybe match the role or the team that you're applying to. So that's a huge tip, I would say, is to invest time in that first step of the application for you to get noticed. And there's a place that as well you can put that that extra point that we talked about, like finding something interesting that makes you stand out. Maybe you have somewhere that you can include that on your resume as well, so they remember you. And then I guess another thing that I always tell people is make sure you're practicing a lot. I think it's another obvious point that people maybe don't invest enough time in, but practice makes perfect. So before you go to the interviews, make sure that you are practicing, you research interview questions online. You can even do like mock interviews with your friends, but for sure, lots of practice before you go into any of these types of interviews.
Yeah, some great points there. Like, totally agree with you regarding the resume. There's no one size fits all resume, isn't it? You need to first look at which company you're applying to. Then, like you said, tweak your resume to or covering letter to add the things specific to that company before applying. Don't just send the same covering letter and resume to every employer. Things different. So you need to put some effort in as well. Again, great point on practice, and then having that if you're applying for a technical job, make sure you have like a GitHub profile or things like that where employer can go and have a look. So not just having the technical skills, but it's really important that you stand out by following these tips. So thank you for sharing that. So coming back to, I wouldn't ask all the questions as Google questions. Just one more questions regarding Google. In 2002, like Yahoo had a chance to buy Google for like 5 billion, but they didn't. They said like, okay, we're only going to pay you 3 billion. Today, Google's worth like 600 billion. So, what do you think Google is doing right to get from where they were to where they are now?
First of all, when you tell me this story, the first thing that comes to mind is the same thing that happened between Blockbuster and Netflix,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you know about. So back in, I believe it was 2000, around 2000, Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million, and they didn't accept it. They didn't even give it a second thought. So I think it's a lesson that can easily be learned from these mistakes that were done by Blockbuster and later Yahoo. They unfortunately had to learn the hard way. But what can we learn from lessons like this? For me, it's just don't get too comfortable and do not assume that your business is safe for the long term. You need to always be adapting and changing in the market, especially when you're working in like the tech market, which is constantly changing. There's lots of innovators, there's lots of disruptors, and you need to be ready for the changes that come. So some advice for that, for companies or anyone getting into this industry, I think there's a couple of key things that Google and other tech companies do. And one of those is giving lots of flexibility to the employees. So in a lot of different senses, they give us flexibility in like giving us room to flourish in whatever we do best, as well as like encouraging creativity. They love innovation, and you don't necessarily get punished for mistakes because mistakes are expected. Failure is expected when you're trying to innovate. So that's just a part of the culture. Another thing that I think companies should avoid is micromanagement. Micromanagement kills creativity and innovation. So give, again, this kind of relates to flexibility, but give your employees flexibility and freedom and trust in them. And then the third thing I would say is that you need to invest in your employees. Google is very good about doing this. So you need to make sure that you get the right employees on board, that you invest a lot of time in the hiring process to make the perfect match. And then once you do choose and you hire new employees, that you invest in their development and their happiness. So I think there's a lot of different best practices we can learn from companies like Google, but for sure these three things would help. And then actually, this reminds me of a book that I would recommend everybody. There's a book called How Google Works. And if you read that, you'll get a better idea of some of the points that I'm talking about, and quite a few more things as well.
Oh, some great points there. Like, don't get too comfortable with however big the company you are. Don't get comfortable. I remember the Blockbuster thing. Someone the other day, someone even shared the tweet that Blockbuster tweeted regarding Netflix on that during that time. Like they said something about the people who are leaving Netflix, please comment under this tweet and things like that. So they thought that they're never going to go, but that happened. Again, about flexibility, great point. You are doing the book a week challenge. That people you read one book every week. So people watching would like to know like how important it is that you read for your to be successful in your career or for your personal development.
For me, it's very important. Like you said, I host this book a week challenge. I do that on LinkedIn. And the purpose of it is to try to encourage people to read more. Just because I started noticing, especially in my commute to work, that people are throwing away so much time during the day, usually playing games on their phone, watching, videos, scrolling through social media, and we're throwing away a lot of time. So I started this initiative a couple of years ago to try to encourage people to read more books. And I think it's very, very important because it really contributes to your continuous learning. And you don't necessarily have to be reading like academic books. It doesn't have to be dense, boring books. Even novels, just getting lost in a novel, I still think it's very good for you. And one thing I do as part of the challenge, what I do is switch between novels and a little bit more educational books. So educational doesn't have to be academic either. Like the book that I said, How Google Works, for me, I classify that as educational. I'm learning something about a company. So I switch every week, 1 week novel, 1 week educational. And I think it's key. And as well, you'll notice a pattern in a lot of very successful people like Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey. They tend to read a lot of books. It's a pattern that you see. So I encourage as well others, if you can't do a book a week, start off with a book a month, and you should start to notice the benefit over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I've heard Bill Gates even takes like a week off or a month off just to isolate himself from the world, and all he does is read. So it's really important that you keep up to date. It's your personal development. There are lots of books out there where you can develop yourself as a person and keep yourself motivated. And then, like you said, you can switch between if you think like you've done you've read so much personal development books, you can switch to novels. But it's really important that you keep that reading habit going for to be successful. Coming that leads on to my next question, where people a lot of people that coming into data science have to deal with a lot of conflicting information from different sites. So what are some of the pitfalls in your opinion that newcomers should avoid when coming into this field?
Yeah, I would say one of the first things is not getting your hands dirty. So maybe you're new to this, you're afraid of programming, coding. It's great that you study and start with the theory, and it's great if you really start to understand the theory, but you will fail later if you don't get enough hands-on practice. So that would be one pitfall, is focusing too much on the theory and not the application, the practical applications. And nowadays there's a ton of places to get practical application, plenty of practice. You mentioned GitHub earlier, which is a great place to develop your programming, but in an open platform, and read what others are doing, learn about what others are doing. But as well, I would highly recommend Kaggle. So if you are not getting enough experience either at work or in your studies, you can participate in online competitions of data science with Kaggle. So that's one thing. Make sure you get your hands dirty. And then another one is, I guess I would say a lot of people make the assumption that you have to be an expert programmer. They make the assumption that that's the way it is as a data scientist, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily so. I think there's a wide spectrum of data scientist types, and some data scientists are closer to the business side, which means that they might be doing less coding, but more responsible for interpreting the data and finding the data's implications for the business, as well as you might have them doing reporting or data visualization with a user-friendly tool. You don't necessarily have to be programming. So you could be using something like Data Studio or Tableau, which is drag and drop. There's no programming necessary. So yeah, I think those would be two of the main things.
Yeah, so yeah, that's really good points there. Like more practice. There should be a balance between practice and theory, isn't it? Like too much theory won't help you, and too much practice won't help you either. So it's going to be like just learn enough to move forward. Then when you get stuck, come back, learn that thing. Then it's an iterative process. And then good points on Kaggle and entering into competitions and to keep yourself moving forward. So we are almost at the end of our podcast. So as a last question, I would ask you, like, if you could give, if you're asked to give one advice to aspirers who are coming into this field, what would that be?
I would say work on your data storytelling capabilities. I think this is another thing that's very often overlooked. Communication skills are super important for everyone, but definitely for data science roles. And it's the most important soft skill to have as a data scientist, I think. And if you can really work on that skill and you learn how to translate technical findings to non-technical people or to business people, if you learn how to tell the story of what's happening in the data, I think your value as a data scientist really skyrockets. I mean, you can't compare. And I would say work on those skills, and with that, work on just in general your communication skills and public speaking skills, because it will open a lot of doors for you. So yeah, I would say take every chance you get to do public speaking, to present your results to teams, to clients, etc. And by doing that, you can become a lot more successful in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're presenting some data to someone like a CEO or someone, they don't necessarily will be interested in like which model you use or like what's the math behind it. For them, all they want is like, what can I learn from this? So effective communication and good visualization skills are sometimes overlooked, but it's really, really important that you have that skill with you to be successful. That will really help in your journey. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Christina, for coming on this podcast. It was really, really nice to have you. And then I learned a lot about yourself, about Google, about some other things about reading books. I hope all these things coronavirus things are resolved so you can go back home. And then I hope you can reset a new wedding day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.